G'day everybody, Nick Dingle here for lesson number 11 of software engineering, loops. We're going to look at loops in Python. How do you repeat code? If you find yourself copying and pasting or writing the same lines of code over and over and over, welcome to loops. There are two types we're going to look at in this video, a while loop and a for loop. The while loop being the one above my head, the for loop, we'll talk about him later. So anytime you find yourself repeatedly doing something, or maybe you want to count from a low value to a big value or vice versa, or you want to go through lots and lots of data repeatedly, loops are for you. So to give you the quick example, let's jump over into Visual Studio Code. Let's write up this example and I'll talk you through what I'm doing at the end. So count is equal to 1. Okay, you write a while loop line the same way you do in our if statement, but you start with the keyword while. Count is less than 10. So there's our condition, and the condition must be true or false. While it's true, the code block is continually executed again and again and again. As soon as that condition becomes false, it jumps out of the loop and continues with the main script. So we're going to print count to the screen. We're going to increase count by 1. And then I'm just going to print finished down the bottom. So have a prediction of what you think is going to come up on the screen before I hit the play button. Now, there we go. 1 all the way to 9 with the word finished at the very bottom. So what's happening there is we're setting count to 1. It goes into our loop and it says, is count less than 10? Well, yes, it is because it's 1. So print that to the screen, increase it by 1 up to 2, and then do the same thing again. 2, 3, 4, all the way until we get to 10, at which point the loop stops and it jumps out. Okay, I love doing breakpoints, so let's have a look at what this looks like in a line-by-line basis. So the code runs, we set count to 1, it's less than 10, so it goes into the loop, it prints it to the screen, and then it increases it by 1. And as you can see, it goes back up, checks the condition again, and then goes down. And it will constantly do that, as I said, until the condition is false, because have a look, count is 10. 10 is no longer less than 10, so it jumps down to the next line, and then it finishes up the application. Okay, so that's the behavior of a loop. Now, one thing you've got to be very, very careful of is that if you're doing a counting loop like this one here or something similar, you've got to make sure at some point that condition becomes false. If it doesn't, you've now got yourself what you call an infinite loop. Now, most people have experienced infinite loops. It's where your program goes gray, Windows says not responding, or your phone freezes up and you can't do anything. It's because we're stuck in a loop and the condition is never getting to false. As you can see, it's spewing ones out on the page here. I cannot scroll because it's so many ones appearing. I'm going to shut that down just by hitting the bin. So please be careful. Try not to get yourself stuck in infinite loops. It can cause some pretty bad damage. Okay, so with that said and done, that is the basics of a while loop. And I know a lot of people like to look at flowchart sort of representations of these things just so they get a bit of an idea of what the hell is going on. So I've already talked about this, but let me re-emphasize. A while loop repeats the code block while the condition is true. When it becomes false, it stops. Now, what does it look like in terms of the flowchart? Well, in terms of visualizing it, in my code, I set count to 1. We checked if count is less than 10, and it was, so we printed it, we added 1, and then we went back and we checked it again. And then we did those, and we continually repeated until it was 10 or bigger, and then it jumped down back into the main code. So this is sometimes known as a pre-test loop. It's known as pre-test because the test or the condition appears above the code block. So this is our code block, and technically it doesn't appear above it, but it appears before it. Pre-test, okay? Do it before the commands. So the opposite does exist. Post-test loops do exist, but I'm not going to focus on them today. All right, another example for you. Let's say we're going to come back to that guessing game that we had in our if statement video. Let's make it a little bit more powerful. Let's give them multiple attempts to try and get it correct. So go away code, go away breakpoints, and I'm going to say guess equals, not double equals, single equals, and I'm going to do a while guess does not equal 3. Now this is basically the exact same code that's in the slide, slightly varied, and I'm going to get the guess from the user. So we need to use input, but because it's a number, we need to cast it as an integer. Guess a number 1 to 10 this time. Let's make it a little bit harder. And then down here, outside the loop, I'm going to print correct, because the only way they can escape the loop is if they get the number correct. So let's hit the play button. Okay, guess a number, 1, 10, 100, 3. Okay, world's tiniest guessing game. Probably not the smallest, but in my opinion, 4 lines of code. That's not very much. So there you go. There's another way of using the while loop. It doesn't have to be about counting. It's just if that condition is true or it is false. And another example for you is right here. I've just got another input, but this time I'm using a string because once again, the conditions don't have to be about numbers. They can be about words or actions or anything of the sort. So while word doesn't equal quit, get another word. So this could be good for like a menu system. And when they type in X, quit the application. Simple as that. So there you go. We've got the majority of this done and dusted, but I haven't mentioned one really cool, I haven't mentioned for loops, but I want to quickly mention the else keyword. Now, just like with if statements, loops actually have the else keyword. This applies to while loops and for loops, by the way. I know it says while loops, but you can do them with for loops as well. Basically what it is when you finish your loop, you can print a message. So for example, let's get rid of this code and bring this guy back. And you know what? I'm going to get rid of that line for now. So while it's less than 10, do the stuff that we did. I'm going to put else here and print count has reached 10, like so. If I press play, as you can see, it does 1 to 9, and then right at the end, when the condition becomes false, it then prints that message once. So the else statement happens at the end of your loop, but it only happens once, which is very handy for sort of like a I'm finished, what's the message you want to tell the user sort of thing. Okay, so there you go. There's another little bit that you can put on the end of your loops. Okay, deep breath. For loops. For loops are really good for counting or looping over objects or lists or things like a string. Okay, so as you can see in this example here, I'm doing a counting loop, but it's a lot simpler, and I'll get to what the hell it is in just a sec. So let's start it off. For loop, start with the for keyword, lowercase, all the same. We need to create a variable on the line in which you write the word for. So if I say for count, this is automatically going to create a variable for me called count. And then I want it to count from 0 to, let's say, 5 or something. So count in range. And then we're going to give it like the stop value. So the stop value is just going to be 5. Colon, just like an if statement. Next line, print count. All right, so press play. And you'll notice the numbers 0 to a 4 appear, because when you say range 5, 0 is the smallest number, and then it goes all the way up to, but not including the range. So 5. So if I want 5 on the screen, I need to write 6. If I don't want 0, I can actually specify the starting number for our for loop, 1, 6, and this will go 1 to 5. And the same sort of thing, you can do any number you want, okay, from a small number to a big number, positive to negative, all that kind of stuff. All right, with that said and done, there is another nice little trick that this range can do. You can actually skip values. Let's say, for example, I only want all the odd numbers in a range. Okay, so 1 to 10, but if you put 2 as what's called the step value, that's the start, that's the stop, that's the step, that's what these 3 things are indicating. If you do that, it means when it does a loop, it increases the value of count, not by 1, which it did before, it'll increase it by 2. So when I press play, it gives me 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So it only gives me the odd values. If I wanted the evens, you could simply do this. Start at 2, finish in 11, and now it's going 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. All right. So have a go. Play around with those loops as much as you can. We've got a couple more examples before I sign off, but those are the basic uses of the while loop and the for loop as it is. Now, this example here is a bit of a jump forward, but I'm going to introduce a list, okay? A list is essentially multiple values in a single variable. And in this case, I've made a list called names, and I've put Dingle, Alice, Emily, and Bob, 4 strings inside my list, okay? Then what I'm doing is I'm going to loop through that list and print a hello message for each person that's in my list. So let's get rid of those. Names equals square brackets to indicate a list, and then each of the names that you wish to include, and then Bob. And again, the for loop allows us to go over each item in the list really simply. So for the name of a variable that you want to create in, and before we did range, but now we're going to do names, colon at the end, and then let's do a print f string. Hello, and then person. Don't type names, otherwise you're going to print the whole list every single time it loops. So this will loop 4 times because there are 4 items inside of our list. Press play, and there we go. It's gone through each item in the list and printed those to the screen. And in a similar vein, you can actually do that. I showed this off in the strings video, but just in case you weren't there, you can do a similar thing to strings. What word shall we use today? We shall use Dingo Teach because I'm so imaginative. Now, if I want to loop through each letter in that string, or each character, I should say, for character in word print character. Press play, and what you'll notice is that every single letter of Dingo Teach will appear on a separate line, and the for loop shuts down when it gets to the last letter, or when it's done the last letter. Okay. So with all that said and done, there's been a fair amount of information. There is one more concept I want to talk about, and that is the continue keyword. Now, the continue keyword exists again with both while loops and with for loops. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to skip over a select value and check the condition straight away. So for example, if I wanted to go through all the numbers in a range, but skip the odd numbers, yes, I could do the step that I did before, but let's just bear with me and let's just have a go at using continue. So I'm using an if statement in a for loop. So we're getting a little bit nested now. Let's create for loop count in range, and we're going to go from 1 to 11. But I want to skip odd numbers. And the way you do that is we're going to do a modulus. We're going to mod 2. And if we get a remainder, we have an odd number. So in other words, 1 modulus 2 gives a remainder of 1. 2 modulus 2 gives a remainder of 0. That makes it even. So if count modulus 2 equals 1, continue. So again, what that's going to do is that will skip whatever number we're up to and go to the next value and start at the top. So we'll print count just here, just to show you that it works. And there you go. It's printed all the even values without using that step that I was doing before. And again, I'm going to do my breakpoint because I love my breakpoints. Okay, we start at the top, set up count. Okay, and you'll notice that 1 provides a remainder. So it hits continue, which makes it jump back up to the top of the loop to check that condition to see if we've hit that top number. Goes back down. Now we are up to 2. That has no remainder, so we print it. Okay, and so that's how the continue keyword works. Okay. There is one last example that I always love to give when I'm doing this kind of code, and that is to create like a menu that constantly repeats itself while the user stays and selects things. So let's say we've got that video game example again. So Let's do a welcome to my game. Select from the following. And the options could easily be things like new game, probably the easiest one, new game. Second one is load game. Third one is settings. And fourth one is quit. Okay, and we'll set them to A, B, C, and I always like to do X for quit. Don't ask me why. We'll get the choice equals input, like so. And then we'd set up our if statements. I'd have my separate functions, all that kind of stuff. But what I want to do is I want this menu system here to repeat itself so long as they don't type in X for whatever reason. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is at the top of my program, I'm going to use a while loop, but first I'm going to make choice equal an empty string. Now, the reason I do that is because when I start writing my while loop, my variable choice has to exist before I write the while line. So that's why I do that here. While choice does not equal X, because that's what shuts the game down. This is the code I want to repeat, so we'll make that the block of code for our while loop. So while choice doesn't equal X, display the menu, asking for another choice. So we'll run it. Welcome to my game. A for a new game, reloads the menu, load the game, settings, quit, shuts the program down. Okay. So I always like to do that example just to show to people how beneficial and some of the things that you can do when it comes to loops. So good luck, have fun. I'll see you in the next video.